British troops on patrol in Northern Ireland may often find themselves in direct confrontation with the civilian population. Traditionally, the soldier fights on the battlefield, but in Northern Ireland, the battlefield has been replaced by the suburban street. There is no traditional enemy, but instead a divided civilian population with extremists on both sides, intent on waging war not only against each other, but also against the army. It is against this background that a soldier must do his duty. One soldier, Trooper William Dugdale of the 16th Hussars, found he could not accept this situation, and so he deserted his regiment. As a result of his desertion, Arthur Parfitt, the author of the book Trespass Under Arms, has been charged with incitement to disaffection under a 1934 Act of Parliament.
Trooper William Dugdale.
Yes.
Will you tell the court what you did on January the 6th of this year?
We, that is, Ronald Fisk and I, left camp and crossed the border into the Republic.
Trooper Dugdale, what word would you use to describe your actions on January the 6th?
We were deserting, sir.
And have you since been found guilty of that offence by a military court?
Yes, sir.
Why did you do it?
Well, there were lots of reasons, really. Well, we'd been in Ireland about 4 months, all in Derry. We'd done our turn in the Bogside in Cregan. Well, it takes people different ways. I found it pretty depressing.
Did any of your comrades find it pleasant patrolling the Bogside and the Cregan?
Well, no, sir.
That's what I would have thought. Yet how many of them deserted?
Well, there was a sergeant who deserted his troop in Belfast.
I meant from your regiment.
Just Trooper Fisk and me.
Would you say other members of your regiment were innately more courageous or innately more loyal than you?
Mr. Golding, I think that question should be rephrased.
Well, all I'm trying to establish, my lord, is that Trooper Dugdale's morale was no lower than that of his comrades.
Yes, I know exactly what you're trying to establish, but I should prefer to hear it in the witness's own words.
As your lordship pleases. Trooper Dugdale, would it be natural for troops patrolling the Bogside?
My lord, how is this witness expected to know what is natural or unnatural for troops to do under particular conditions?
I would have thought, my lord, that a regular serving soldier would be competent to express an opinion about the morale of his comrades.
Morale, yes, but you were talking about courage and loyalty, different things altogether.
But related, my lord.
Too distantly for you to ask about them.
Taking the regiment as a whole, was morale high at the time when you deserted?
Well, it wasn't high, but then when you're fighting someone who isn't supposed to be your enemy, that's not surprising. Of course, there are always some fellows who don't mind, don't think a lot.
Now, had you read at any time before you went to Ireland books on political science?
Yes.
Many?
A few, at school in the sixth form, and some afterwards.
At school, where was that?
Highford Grammar. That's in Kent.
And what O-levels and A-levels did you obtain?
7 O's and 2 A's.
And what were the subjects of the A-level?
History and economics.
Did you concentrate on any particular period of history?
Modern history.
Mm-hmm. And did the books which you read on political science include a book by the accused called Trespass Under Arms?
Yes, sir.
Did that book make much impression on you at the time?
Not especially. No more than a lot of other books.
Now, will you take a look at this book? Is that the book, Trooper Dugdale?
Yes, sir.
And is that your own copy, the one you bought 2 years ago?
Yes.
This is Exhibit 1.
Yes, my lord.
I see. Well, how can you identify this as your own copy?
Well, I know the books I wrote in it.
Well, I see that certain passages have been underlined. Did you do this?
Yes, sir.
I see. Thank you. I take it you've no objection for the book going before the jury?
No, my lord.
Even though certain pages have been marked?
The defendant has no objection to his book being introduced, my lord, either marked or unmarked.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan.
And when was your regiment posted to Northern Ireland?
In September 1972.
I'd now like to ask you about the events prior to your desertion. Now, you've told us you went to Northern Ireland in September 1972, but you didn't desert till January the 6th the following year. Did anything occur during those 4 months which led to your decision to desert?
Well, I had Mr. Parfitt's book with me. I got it out and read it again.
Why?
Well, because of what was going on. It was like someone had made a film of his book, walking up and down the streets of Derry. I got it out, and there it all was, in black and white.
There all what was?
The wickedness of it. Look, we had no right to be there, just like he says in his book.
Oh, my lord.
Quite. Does it say in the defendant's book that the troops should not walk up and down the streets of Londonderry?
Well, it doesn't say Londonderry, sir, no.
In that case, you mustn't suggest that it does. Please continue, Mr. Golding.
Now, what was the effect on you of reading this book while you were stationed in Ireland?
Well, it got me thinking again, because I was there. It meant even more to me than the first time. I was shattered.
Shattered? What do you mean by that?
Look, until I'd read his book, I'd never realised there was another side to this business of armies tramping all over civilians. I mean, you think of troops in camps, or on schemes, or in action in a battle area. You don't think of troops in towns, or in people's back gardens using arms in the street.
You mean you never heard of it before?
Yeah, I'd heard of it, but I'd never thought about it. I mean, after a war you get it, or where there's been a revolution, but not in an ordinary country in peacetime.
Trooper Dugdale, I want to be quite sure I understand what you're saying. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying that until you read the accused's book, Trespass Under Arms, you had no idea that armed troops ever operated anywhere in peacetime except inside prescribed military areas.
No, I don't mean that. No, what I mean is, until I'd read the book, I'd never realised the position the army was in.
Well, that's rather different. What do you mean by position?
Look, he says in his book, I marked it when I read it again. Now, he says, in a proper run democracy, civilians' rights and opinions are expressed through Parliament, through politics. And he also says it's the job of the police force to protect civilians from other civilians, and everyone knows where they stand. But he says troops are different. Now, they come in from the outside. It's their job to resist aggression from the outside. And to have armed troops walking up and down the streets takes away people's political rights.
And you've never met this line of argument before?
Well, not like this. He had a whole chapter on how the police force belonged to the area where you live, and the troops come in from the outside. They're nothing to do with you.
My lord, I've said I've no objection to the book itself being introduced, but I do object to the book's contents being reported in this garbled fashion.
Can he not describe his reactions to this book as part of the res gestae?
Well, to my submission, no, my lord. We are being given his interpretation of certain passages out of context, which might lead to a false impression being created.
Yes, well, I don't agree. What you call the witness's interpretation merely describes the effect these passages had on the witness. I think the jury ought to hear the whole story.
Yes, my lord, but the effect these passages had on the witness might be entirely untypical.
Which, of course, you will be at great pains to demonstrate, Mr. Lotterby. I shall permit this line of questioning, Mr. Golding, but only so long as it concerns the effect of the book on this witness.
My lord.
I shall only permit this so that the jury can have the background to the really vital evidence.
Had any other books which you read on political science shattered you?
No, sir. There was nothing like this.
Nothing like the accused's Trespass Under Arms?
No, sir. It got me in a right state, you know. I didn't know what to do.
However, what did you do?
Well, I wrote a letter to Mr. Parfitt.
Now, what did you say in the letter?
Well, I told him I'd read his book again and that I was very confused.
Confused?
About the rights and wrongs of being in Ireland.
Anything else?
And I asked him if he could recommend any other books on the subject that could help me sort things out.
And did the accused reply to your letter?
Yes, he wrote back.
And what did you do when you got the letter?
Well, I wrote back to him. He'd asked us to go and see him at his house. And we had some leave due, so I wrote back and said that we would.
By us, you mean Trooper Fisk and yourself?
Yes, sir.
And you told him the date you'd be arriving?
That's right, yes.
Are any of these letters available?
Oh, my lord, none of them have come into the possession of the prosecution.
Oh, well, no doubt if the accused has any of the correspondence, it will be produced in due course.
My lord, it may assist if I say straight away that none of these letters can be found.
But it's not disputed that there was some correspondence?
No, my lord.
I see. Thank you, Mr. Lotterby. Continue, Mr. Golding.
My lord. When did you first meet the accused?
On December the 30th last year.
Where?
At his house here in Forchester.
You and Trooper Fisk?
Yes, sir.
Now, will you tell his lordship and the jury what occurred?
Well, it was Saturday evening. We arrived about 7 o'clock. We had a cup of tea, then went into Mr. Parfitt's front room and had a long talk.
And was the accused expecting you?
Oh, a bit later than we were meant to be, so he didn't know when we were coming, but he was expecting us.
I see. And what happened after your talk?
Well, we had some food and then went to bed.
What time was that?
Quite late, about 1.
So let's see, you arrived at 7 o'clock and you went to bed at 1 o'clock. That's 6 hours later. Well, apart from having your meal, what did you do during those 6 hours?
We talked.
All of you talked?
Well, Mr. Parfitt mostly.
And what did he talk about?
Ireland, the troubles and that.
For 6 hours?
Well, like I said, I'd read his book again. I had a lot of questions, and Mr. Parfit had a lot of answers.
Trooper Dugdale, I'm now going to ask you about this conversation. You may be completely frank and tell us in your own words just what was said.
Well, it was a lot of talk, interesting talk, but it all came down to one thing. Now, what Mr. Parfit was saying was, it's wrong for armed troops to be controlling a civilian population in peacetime. And he also said that each soldier was responsible for his own actions. He couldn't hide behind his officers or even the government. If a soldier did wrong against humanity, then he was at fault, and he couldn't pass the blame off onto anyone else.
Did Mr. Parfit expand on this topic of passing the blame?
Well, he talked about the Nuremberg trials after the war, about the Germans who'd gassed Jews and shot prisoners of war, all the atrocities. He said that the lawyers at Nuremberg all agreed that it was the man who did the actual gassing, or the man who pulled the trigger that shot the prisoner. He was the one responsible for the crime, and not just the officers who gave him the orders.
Well, how could all of this have anything to do with you and Trooper Fisk? Were you killing unarmed prisoners in Ireland?
No, of course not, but he said we were putting ourselves in the same position. He said we were responsible adults behaving illegally, and we couldn't hide behind our officers just because they told us to do it.
Trooper Dugdale, Mr. Parfit told you that you were behaving illegally and that you couldn't pass the blame off onto the officers just because they gave you the orders.
That's what he said, yes.
What was said next?
Well, we asked him what we could do about it, and later on he told us, and that's what we did.
Now, Trooper Dugdale, you're saying that the accused actually advised you to desert?
Well, he didn't use the word desert, sir, no.
What word did he use?
He said we should get ourselves out of it.
Get yourself out of it might just have meant that you should ask the military authorities to be sent away from Ireland.
No, sir. No, he knew that was no good. We'd already talked about that.
Then what did you understand him to mean?
Get ourselves out of it the best way we could. Cross the border. Vanish. Desert.
So in the context of the conversation you had had when the accused told you to get yourselves out of it, you understood him to mean that you should desert?
Couldn't have meant anything else, sir.
I see. One last question, Trooper Dugdale. When you left the accused's house the next morning, did he say anything to you to suggest that you should not get yourselves out of it, or that he might have changed his mind?
His last words to me, sir, were, "Don't forget what we talked about last night. You can't sidestep your responsibilities."
And these were the words you acted on?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Trooper Dugdale.
Would I be right in saying that in Northern Ireland you were unhappy from the very beginning, from the day you arrived?
I suppose so, yes.
What made you unhappy? Life in the army or this particular work?
The army was all right.
And the job you had to do?
I didn't like it.
No, well, I'm sure nobody actually enjoys the possibility of being shot in the back at any moment. I'm sure even your happy colleagues didn't enjoy that.
It was the kids and the women.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they hate you.
Well, that is something the troops have had to face since time immemorial now, isn't it?
They're supposed to be our own people, sir.
Oh, you mean if they hadn't been citizens of the United Kingdom, you wouldn't have minded the women and children hating you?
I didn't say that.
No, but I'm asking you, would it have made a difference?
Yes.
Why?
No. Well, I don't mean that exactly. Look, it's fighting civilians I'm talking about.
Fighting the women and children.
And the men. Look, it's not a job for troops. The whole thing's political. It's a job for the politicians.
Is that what your colleagues thought?
Well, no. Like I said, a lot of them don't think about it.
But you did?
Yes.
Before you left England, had you thought a good deal about the Irish situation?
I'd thought about it.
You were worried about it before you left, were you? About the women and children hating you?
Well, I suppose I was, but not especially then.
Did you have many casualties in your regiment?
Not many.
How many?
3,
3 dead. How many wounded?
5.
Friends of yours?
No?
No? Yet 2 of these men were in your own squadron, weren't they? Didn't you know them?
Yes, I knew them, yes.
But they weren't friends?
Not friends, no.
Or did you have many friends in the squadron?
1 or 2.
Well, why only 1 or 2?
I don't know. How many should I have?
Oh, well, it's just that I would have thought that in that situation, set down in the middle of a hostile community, you'd have looked for companionship amongst your comrades. I'd have thought you'd have found reassurance and courage amongst your friends. But not you.
I didn't need friends for that.
No, of course not. You had your books, didn't you? Well, you had the defendant's book. Tell me, why did you buy that particular book?
It looked interesting.
Did you know of it? Had it been recommended?
No,
You saw it and bought it. Had you ever heard the name Arthur Parfit before?
I may have. I can't remember.
Well, don't you remember the enormous controversy when the book was first published?
No?
Well, there were articles in all the papers about it, discussions on television. You don't remember any of that?
No.
Well, that's odd, isn't it? Someone who has studied political science like you have, missing out on all the excitement caused by the defendant's book. A book which you yourself carried in your kit bag, where others carry their field marshal's baton. Well, perhaps you didn't study the subject at all. Perhaps you just dipped into it from time to time. In which case, of course, you might well have been startled by what the defendant had to say. In a way, an expert would not have been startled.
Look, I did read politics. Why else should I go and see him?
To discuss the Nuremberg trials, perhaps.
No, to talk about his book. Yeah, and Nuremberg. We talked about that.
Now, what did you learn about Nuremberg at the defendant's house?
Well, you were saying about responsibility in that.
Are you suggesting that the defendant actually compared your position in Northern Ireland to that of the SS in Buchenwald? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, no, of course not. But he said there was a path that could lead from one soldier standing on a street corner to a whole cabinet in Downing Street made up of colonels.
And is that why you deserted?
No, you're cutting corners. Look, it's a long way from one to the other. From us in Derry to troops around the entire country, but it's a direct way.
And you believe that?
Yes, I do.
Your studies and your experiences have led you to this conclusion?
Yes.
To the point where you could no longer bear the responsibility. You had to get out.
Right.
Well, you seem very certain about all this, Trooper Dugdale.
I am certain.
If you spent 6 hours with me, could I change your mind?
Probably not.
Oh, my learned friend here with all his powers of persuasion. And yet you've told us the accused did just that. You arrived at 7 in the evening for a quiet literary discussion, and 6 hours later you were prepared to commit one of the most serious crimes open to a serving soldier. Now, what I want to know, Trooper Dugdale, is how the defendant was able to change your mind where another man couldn't.
He talked. He's a great talker.
Oh, I'm a great talker, Trooper Dugdale. It's my profession, but I couldn't do it. You said so.
That's different. Now, you have different ideas, but Mr. Parfit and me, we start off the same. We agree.
Before you even began talking?
Yes.
Now, let me get this quite straight. You were in agreement before you began talking. That is, you knew your own mind before you ever sat down in the defendant's house, before you ever met him face to face.
I'd read his book.
Oh, so have tens of thousands of others. I haven't heard it suggested in this court that it was the book which caused you to desert. Is that what you're now saying?
It was a part of it, yes.
Right. Did Trooper Fisk, to your knowledge, read Trespass Under Arms?
I don't know, he may have. We talked about it.
Did he read it?
Bits, perhaps.
Bits you pointed out to him, bits you'd underlined in the text.
Well, I did
underline. Are you saying
it.
it was you and your use of selected passages in the defendant's book which caused Fisk to desert?
No, it was nothing to do with me.
Well, it was your book. You showed it to him.
Trooper Dugdale, you don't need to answer that question. Mr. Lotterby, these questions are such that the witness might incriminate himself.
But it all happened in Mr. Parfit's room, sir, not in camp.
Please continue, Mr. Lotterby.
I'm obliged, my lord. So you were saying that the decision to desert took place in the defendant's house, but not for you, Trooper Dugdale. You'd arrived with your mind made up, hadn't you? No doubts, no second thoughts. No one was going to change your mind, not even the defendant. Am I right?
Look, he didn't have to. I'd read his books or he'd written letters.
Ah, yes, the letters. Well, we'll come to those in a moment. Now, the defendant said to you, you should get yourselves out of it. And you interpreted that as meaning you should desert.
Nothing else he could have meant.
Now, why didn't he say you should desert?
I don't know. It's up to him what he says.
There was no reason why he shouldn't have used the word desert, was there? Did the defendant strike you as a devious man, a man who used indirect language or allusion rather than saying exactly what he meant?
Perhaps he didn't like to use the word desert.
For fear of offending you? He spent 6 hours, according to your evidence, urging you to desert that he can't bring himself to use the actual word. Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't know.
No, Trooper Dugdale. On reflection, is it not possible that the words you should get yourselves out of it meant something other than that you should desert?
That's what he meant.
But it was too inhibited to say. I see. Now, the other words you remember being said, you can't sidestep your responsibilities. But did you take those words also to mean you should desert?
They were all a part of it.
What do you think he meant by those particular words?
He was talking about decency, civilization. Look, he had to stand by that.
Did he seem concerned about the probable outcome of this perilous course he was urging upon you?
I don't know about perilous. Fisk never got caught.
You don't regard desertion as perilous?
Well, it depends. I mean, you don't think about what's going to happen to you, you just do it.
Wouldn't you say that behaving like that could be pretty perilous?
Well, it depends what you believe in.
No, Trooper Dugdale, I suggested it doesn't. If a man urges you to desert, then he's urging you to take the most hazardous leap into the dark, to cut yourself off from your chosen career and from a normal life. The best thing that can happen to a deserter is that he ends up where you've ended up. He may, like you, have acted from principle, but that doesn't minimize the disaster that awaits him. And you were saying that the defendant is the sort of man who would urge you to take a course which would entail for you all these things.
Look, I only met him for 6 hours. Now, I know he believes what he says, and I respect him for that. And he convinced me, too. Maybe he thinks that acting from principle is worth the pain. He believes every man is responsible for his own actions. Look, he didn't push me across the border at gunpoint. He just opened my eyes to one or two things. I did the rest.
He opened your eyes, but the decision was yours.
Yes.
Yes. Now, these letters, they're lost, are they?
I didn't keep them.
Why not?
Why should I?
Nothing important in them.
Not really. Just the invitation to go and see him.
So there was nothing in the defendant's letter to you touching the subject of desertion?
Not in so many words.
Mm-hmm. But you say he invited you to his house.
Yes.
Was a date mentioned?
Now, he said to come any time after Christmas, whenever we could get leave, just to let him know.
And did you let him know?
Yes, I did, yes.
When you arrived, was he expecting you? Was there a fire in the grate, a meal on the table?
We had a meal.
What did you have?
Sardines on toast.
I see. And afterwards, you and Trooper Fisk stayed the night. Oh, were the beds made up?
Oh, when the housekeeper knew we were staying the night, she made the beds up, yes.
But weren't they made up already? If the defendant had been expecting you for dinner after a long journey from Ireland, no, surely he would have been prepared for you to stay the night, wouldn't he?
I don't know.
If he'd been expecting you.
He was expecting
But if not,
us.
then the whole situation looks rather different, doesn't it? Two strangers arrive on his doorstep at 7 at night. He lets you in, gets his housekeeper to knock you up some sort of a meal, and then when we've kept him up till 1 in the morning, arrange for you to stay the night. No suggestion here of a carefully prepared plan to wine and dine two disenchanted young soldiers with a view to seducing them from their allegiance to Her Majesty. Nothing like that at all. So I put it to you, Trooper Dugdale, that the defendant, having no such plans, having no such intentions, was absolutely astonished to find you standing on his doorstep.
No, that's not true! Look, he wrote to us, he asked us to go and see him. If it hadn't have been for him, we'd never have crossed the border. And I wouldn't be standing here now.
The case of the Queen against Parfitt will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.